What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So, we're continuing with our series of kind of looking at what's left for all these teams that are in the playoff hunt. We're going to kind of move up in the standings a little bit. We're flipping over to the Eastern Conference, taking a look at some of the teams that are in the middle of that Eastern Conference standing, because nothing is decided there. From about 4 through like 8 or 9, these teams are pretty close together. So, we're going to have to kind of take a look at what's separating these teams and where all these teams might end up down the stretch. So today I wanted to look at the Miami Heat, they've been up and down all year, and they've kind of been struggling at points. They're about an average team, a 500 team. We kind of have expected them to break through at multiple points throughout the year, and they just have not. And whether that's due to injuries or people being out with health and safety and stuff, that's fine. But this is a team that has clearly been a little bit underwhelming so far, despite being in the finals last year. So I kind of wanted to look at them and see where they might end up and if they're still possibly dangerous in the playoffs. So here's where they're at in the standings. They're currently sitting in the 7th spot in the Eastern Conference, just a half game back of both the Atlanta Hawks and the Boston Celtics. Now, it is important to note that they do not have the tiebreaker over the Hawks. They lost that season series 2-1. So if they do end up tied at the end of the year, the Hawks will be the higher seed. And the Celtics, they have 2 games remaining against them, and they lost the 1 game that they have played already. So they would have to sweep the Celtics to gain that tiebreaker, and that would also help them going up in the standings. And we'll talk about the rest of their schedule in a minute. So they have the opportunity to potentially jump up a little bit here against the Hawks and the Celtics. Like I said, only a half game back. They have the same amount of losses. Celtics have played, or the Heat have played 1 less game, so they have one back in the win column of those other 2. And then they're 2.5 up on Charlotte, and that is nice for them because the Hornets are a team that has beaten them a couple of times this year and is looking a little dangerous with LaMelo coming back soon and potentially Gordon Hayward as well. So the Hornets are a team that could maybe make a run if the Heat don't capitalize, but they do have a couple of games here up on Charlotte to potentially kind of stave them off and keep keep ahead of them in the play-in tournament, or maybe jumping up a little bit higher into the top 5 or 6. So they're in a pretty good spot here. I'm sure they would like to avoid the play-in, and they have a chance to do that here, specifically with these last 2 games against the Celtics. If you sweep them there, it's looking pretty likely that you'll be able to pass them, assuming that you don't crap the bed for your other remaining games or whatever. But they're at 7th place. We have kind of expected them to, rise over the past little while, and they just haven't been able to do it. So we'll have to see if they can get something going here, and I've kind of expected them to get something going for a couple of weeks, and they just have not. So I don't know. We'll see, though. So here's the remaining schedule for Miami. The good news is it's not too hard. There's not a ton of super challenging opponents on here. The bad news is it's a lot of road trips. They have, a couple of road trips remaining. These 3 quick, 2-game trips here. Upcoming next is Cleveland and Charlotte, which shouldn't be too bad. The Cavs are, one of the worst teams in the league, and they have dealt with a lot of injury at the moment, so they're probably not going to be super tough, but I mean, who knows, right? It's a road game. Then you have the Charlotte Hornets, who, like I just mentioned, have beat them twice this year already, and that could potentially be a bigger game, and because the Heat are just a couple games up on the Hornets, like I just said. So they can potentially create some more distance, or if the Hornets win that game, then that becomes a little bit, they are kind of gaining on them a little bit more. So that is a back-to-back as well on the road, so those are always the tougher games to win. They go home for a couple of games against the Mavericks and Minnesota Timberwolves. Mavericks are good, not great. They're definitely beatable. Minnesota Timberwolves are, they've won like 4 in a row, and they have one of the worst records, but they have not been playing like it recently. And assuming that they can keep some momentum up, that is not a gimme game. As we've seen, the Timberwolves have knocked off like the Warriors, and they beat the Jazz twice recently. So they, for a team that is one of the worst records, I don't think they're as bad as their record says at this point. So that's certainly not an easy game by any means. Like I mentioned, 2 games at Boston, that's going to be big, because if they can grab both of those, that potentially gets them up to that 6th spot, or maybe even 5th or 4th or higher than that, because you get those 2 games in, potentially past the Celtics, and get yourself out of the play-in tournament. That's going to be huge. Then they go back home to face the Philadelphia 76ers, who are obviously a great team. They could potentially be locked into their seat at that point. Who knows? They're still kind of battling with the Nets for that number 1 spot, so looks a little bit unlikely. They might actually be, they probably will be playing for something at that point, even with only 3 games left. So Sixers is tough, but it is at home. We'll see how they do there. Then they go at Milwaukee. Also, the Bucks might also not be playing for anything on their second to last day of the season there. So maybe the Bucks are, resting guys. They might be locked into their seed. That does look a little more likely considering they kind of have space. They're in the 3 right now. There's a little bit of space between them and 4 and also between them and 2. So there's a chance that the Bucks are not playing for anything at that point. And then the Detroit Pistons are one of the worst teams in the league. Last day of the season, should be able to get a win there. So like I mentioned, I am a little bit concerned about this team. I had thought that they were going to kind of get it going at multiple points over the last little while. It felt like they were kind of finally getting healthy, getting guys back from health and safety protocols, and they had some easier opponents, they had some easier stretches, and they did capitalize. There's a couple of shorter winning streaks in here, but they also have lost to teams that they should not have lost to. They have not been impressive in some of the games that they've won, and they just feel a little bit lethargic, especially for a team that was in the finals last year and played with such intensity in the postseason. It feels like they have kind of taken a step back this year. Now, last regular season, they weren't setting the world on fire either. They were I think the 5th seed going into last year's playoffs, and then obviously made it all the way to the finals and played really well in the postseason there. So it's not like it's out of the question for them to potentially go on a run, but it is slightly concerning because it feels like Goran Dragic has maybe taken a little bit of a step back. Jimmy Butler has not been as awesome as he was last year. Now, he always turns up in the playoffs, and I have full faith that he'll be able to do that. But that's kind of why they have not been super amazing this year, just because a couple of their players, like even Tyler Hero, has not been as awesome as he was last year's postseason. Duncan Robinson is still a good shooter, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe his percentages are a little down this year. So, some of their players are not playing as well. Now, this is a team that's built for the playoffs, and we saw them be successful, like I just said. So, I do have faith that they will turn up when the playoffs come, but they're running out of time to potentially make their way out of the play-in tournament. And if they do get in the play-in, I would favor them over anybody that they have to play down there. But you never know, right? If it's a one-game shootout, anything can happen. A player on the other team can get hot, and all of a sudden you're down, and you have to, go on the road to win a game or whatever. It gets tougher, right? So, I think it's important for this team to get out of the play-in tournament and get into the first round, without having to fight in a couple of games against some lesser teams, just because you never know what's going to happen. And for what it's worth, I just looked, they also do have the tiebreaker over the New York Knicks, who are just a couple of more games up in that 4th spot. So there's even a chance that they could overtake them at some point, and really they could get as high as 4, which would be nice for them. I think the goal for the Heat should be to get into that 4-5 matchup and match up with a team like Atlanta, New York, or Boston, or any of the other teams that are in that range, because that just feels a lot, easier for them, of course, than it would be to match up against a team like the Bucks or the Sixers or the Nets, because those are clearly the 3 best teams in the Eastern Conference, and you'd like to avoid them in the first round if at all possible. So I think they want to get up to 6. If they can get up even higher to 4 or 5, I think that would be really ideal for Miami. Do I believe they can do it? Potentially. I think those games against the Celtics are going to be a huge tell for where this team is going to end up. And who knows what version of Boston we get in a couple of those games, because the Celtics themselves have been very inconsistent at points this year. I mean, as I'm recording this, they just came back from 32 to beat the Spurs. Everybody thought they were dead in the water, and then all of a sudden Tatum scores 60 and they win. So if the Celtics show up for those games, then it gets a lot tougher. But if the Heat are able to take care of business and beat Boston there, they could potentially get up into that 4-5 matchup, assuming that the Knicks or the Hawks falter down the stretch. And then you're in a situation where you're looking at much more likely to be a second round team than you would be if you're stuck down at 6, 7, or 8 and you're playing one of the 3 best teams in the conference. But yeah, I think that's about all I have on the Miami Heat and the rest of their season. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Heat and where their season is going. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. And then just a heads up, there will not be a video on Sunday tomorrow, going out of town for a little bit. I will be back on Monday though, so look forward to a video on Monday for one of these other teams in this range. I haven't decided, maybe the Knicks, Hawks, or Celtics. We'll figure it out. But yeah, with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next one.